I am Laurie Yoler. I'm a board member of NACD's Northern California chapter, as well as other boards. And I'm also a partner at Playground Global, which is an early stage venture capital firm. And we have made 4 quantum investments so far, one in computing with PsiQuantum, who you'll hear from today, one in algorithms with Phasecraft, and 2 in sensing with Envision and Ideon. I think this is such an important topic to be covering. The White House put out their critical and emerging technologies for 2024, and quantum information and enabling technologies is on that list. And so I'm thrilled that KPMG is sponsoring this important event and that NACD saw it as an important one that board members need to start getting educated on and talking about. And so congratulations to all of you for seeing the opportunity to get educated early and start talking about how quantum technologies could affect your businesses. So I have 3 incredible panelists that I'm so happy will be covering this topic with me. And so I thought I would have each of them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their backgrounds. And then we're going to hear more about how they are putting quantum technology into action today. Let's see. Let's start with Aaron.
Afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to meet you all. My name is Aaron Kemp. I am the U.S. Quantum Lead for KPMG. I've been with the firm about 3 years now, and my background is in cybersecurity, and I spent time as an anti-submarine helicopter pilot in the United States Navy and a bit of time in the Marine Corps. So happy to be here all and really excited about the topic.
Patrick.
Thanks, Laurie. I'm Patrick Huston. I'm a retired Army general. I'm an attorney in San Francisco. I am the general counsel of Ondas Holdings, which is a public company focused on the defense and technology sectors. I just rotated off the board of Quantum Shield, which is a private company focused on quantum resilient security. And I'm on the FBI's AI task force. It's great to be here, Laurie.
Thank you. And Pete.
Hey guys, nice to meet you all. Thanks so much for having us at this event. I really appreciate it. I'm Pete. I'm a co-founder of the company of PsiQuantum. I've worked on quantum computing for about 15 years, so I have a PhD in experimental quantum photonics, and I also did a postdoc in the theory and architecture of fault-tolerant optical quantum computers. And then I've lived here in Palo Alto for the last 8 years, where we've been building PsiQuantum. We're a privately funded startup company, and we're building a very large fault-tolerant quantum computer.
Oh, sorry about that. Wonderful. So I think to level set, since most folks do not have the academic background that Pete does in quantum photonics, I think we should set the stage for the audience. So at a high level, Aaron, we'll start with you. How do you define quantum computing, and how is it different from other types of computing that we might be aware of?
It's a great question. Quantum computing differs in that instead of using the classical bits that we're all familiar with that have really come to drive the technology we use, quantum systems leverage the principles of quantum mechanics. We operate at a much smaller scale. We're much colder. The fundamental part of it is actually a quantum bit, which is called a qubit. These qubits act in a different way to the bits that you may be familiar with. They have some unique properties that we're able to leverage and build systems. They can exist in what is called a superposition. Those of you familiar with the Schrodinger's cat thought experiment. They can kind of be in 2 states at once, and that gives us a way to mess with them and really use them in a manner that we're not normally doing in classical systems. And they can also be entangled with each other. So you'll hear about superpositions and entanglement. And that entanglement gives us the ability that when we observe one, we know what the state of the other one will be. So we're able to build gates and build ways to perform algorithmic functions on these qubits that are very different from classical systems. And this provides us an exponential speed up and an exponential increase in power over classical systems for certain algorithms.
And so that lays out a little bit of some of the technical differences, but Pete, let's jump into real use cases and what fields you think are really going to benefit the most, and how we're taking this multi-state entangled technology and turning it into real business applications. And maybe you can talk about as well some of the organizations or industries that you're already working with to solve real problems.
Yeah, so thanks, Laurie. If you think about the Fortune 100, our biggest industries, for me as a technical person, sometimes when people say Fortune 100, I imagine a bunch of guys in suits shaking hands with each other. And actually, I did the experiment the other day. If you type Fortune 100 into one of these AI image generation apps, it will just show you a picture of a bunch of men in suits shaking hands with each other. That's what AI thinks the Fortune 100 is. Of course, as you guys know, car companies, materials, energy, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, these are the giant industries that form that group. And if you think about those companies and those industries, they all sit on a foundation of chemistry, physics, and math, whether that is the fuel molecule, the drug molecule, the catalyst, the fertilizer, the semiconductor manufacturing process. So much of our industry is based on molecules, materials, chemistry, and physics. And those problems are exactly the problems where quantum computers are expected to solve and answer questions that we will never answer using any conventional supercomputer that we could ever build. And so I think what's really interesting is that also, if you think about those industries, in many cases, they have been able to rest on their laurels for decades using the same petrochemicals, the same semiconductor manufacturing processes, and so on. In recent years, they're being forced to innovate on the microscopic foundations of these giant industries, whether it's due to decarbonization, end of Moore's law, whatever. And so that's why Google, Microsoft, IBM, Intel, Amazon, giant nations around the world are all spending billions of dollars trying to realize quantum computing, is the hope that we can dramatically accelerate the invention and discovery of new drugs, fuels, materials, catalysts, photovoltaics, semiconductors, and so on. And those are all commercial applications. Of course, quantum computing is a dual-use technology, and the most well-publicized kind of additional application is for code breaking, where very large quantum computers are expected to be able to break all known current cryptography techniques. And so this is very much back to the 50s. It's very much like the early days of conventional computers, where those early systems were built to design nuclear weapons, break cryptographic codes, solve chemistry problems, and gave the United States and other nations a strategic edge over their adversaries. And so that is sort of why there is this desperate pull for this technology. And just to emphasize again, we don't expect to be able to make these first principle calculations using any conventional supercomputer or AI system that we can ever build.
And Pete, when you say dual use, what exactly do you mean?
Well, so I think the reason that we're excited about quantum computing is really the commercial applications. If we can find drugs faster, if we can design batteries faster, if we can have mastery over chemistry and physics, we think that's a very lucrative thing to do. But those same machines, once they get to be big enough, could be used to break cryptography. So to read emails, to read messages that are being sent very securely between nations or in a military context. And so that is why I think there is a dual use component to the technology. Yeah.
Laurie?
And Patrick, that's right up your alley. So turning to you.
Well, I was going to just pile on to what they're saying with a few other use cases, but I'll caveat by saying that I'm the only panelist without a PhD in this stuff. So take that for what it's worth. First example is that Google announced this week a new quantum computer called the Willow that has 105 of those qubits. But here's what impressed me. It said it can take a problem and solve it in 5 minutes that would take today's fastest supercomputer 10 septillion years. Now, I didn't even know what a septillion was, so I had to look it up. If you take a billion times a billion times a billion, that's a septillion. So it's a 1 followed by 24 zeros. That's super powerful. That's example number one. The second I'll give is that the first real use case in the US outside of the government or outside of the research labs is the placement of a quantum computer at Cleveland Clinic for medical research. That it's going to be used there. It is being used there to model the behavior of proteins, which is a key component of solving diseases. And then at a larger level, the third example I'll share here is that I was at the NVIDIA headquarters recently in Silicon Valley, and they have created a digital twin of the universe. And if you take that model and apply quantum computing capabilities to power it, then that quantum is going to be able to help solve countless problems ranging from global food production to climate change, and again, major health and medicine problems that it can help solve. So amazing examples of what this computing power can do.
Aaron, any other use cases you wanted to add or that you're most excited about?
I'm very excited about the cancer research portion of this, but I'm also excited about financial services, banking, portfolio optimization. I think there's real things coming down the line in the research that are going to allow us to faster understand why things are working, what patterns are out there. My doctoral work was in post-quantum cryptography, so I'm also excited about some of the quantum cryptography that's being discussed that will hopefully develop into something that is completely secure against quantum.
So very exciting examples. I saw a question in the chat. So when do we think, of course, the big question is timing. When do we think we will have, well, there are a lot of good questions. When do we think we will have those commercially available quantum computers out there that organizations can start solving problems with? Pete, you want to start?
Yeah, happy to. So it's really worth emphasizing building a quantum computer is one of the hardest technical challenges that humans have ever attempted. You got to control quantum systems that are on the bleeding edge of anything that physicists and semiconductor people have ever worked with. So I've got in trouble for describing it as a species level challenge, but I think that's a fair thing to say. It's extraordinarily difficult to build these systems. If you think about NVIDIA, SpaceX, TSMC, ASML, these companies obviously are legendary companies precisely because they did something extraordinarily difficult. The stuff that ASML does, the stuff that TSMC does is so difficult that they have a very deep competitive moat. And so we're happy actually to be playing in a space that's very hard. As far as when, it's maybe not news to some people on this call, but today there are commercially available quantum computers from many different offerings. So you can get on AWS or Google Cloud today, and you can actually get access to a real quantum processor. And probably today there are high school students programming real quantum computers in Python right now as we speak. The problem is that those systems are too small to actually be commercially useful. So they're kind of training wheels. They're good to learn with. But the Google system, for instance, today has 100 qubits. It's a very impressive system. To put that in context, you need about 1 million qubits to do anything commercially useful. So to design drugs, design materials, for those kind of things, you're going to want 1 million qubits instead of the 100 qubits that Google has. Those timelines are hotly debated, as you can imagine. Some people think it will never happen. Some people think it will happen in a couple of years. We're pretty optimistic that we can get it done in a handful of years. And some of our timelines are shared in public. But certainly we're convinced that the key to getting it done quickly is to leverage the semiconductor industry. So if we want to go from handfuls of devices to millions of devices quickly, there's only really one place where you can do that. That's in a semiconductor fab. And so that's why we build our chips in the United States at global foundries, shoulder to shoulder with chips that go into laptops and cell phones today.
And these must be quite expensive to build. How have you seen funding? Is this funding that should come from the commercial world or from government research? Where do you think these are going to get funded, and what's your experience been so far at PsiQuantum, Pete?
That's a great question, Laurie. So I think we're right at the minute on the peak of a curve of people saying that public funding of anything is a waste of time, and everything should be privately funded. And I'm sure that curve will swing around as time goes on. We've raised just over $700 million in private funding, and certainly building a quantum computer isn't cheap. But we also recently announced a $1 billion Australian dollar deal for us to build our first system in Brisbane. So that's a very welcome incentive for us to build that first machine in Australia. And then we also recently announced a $500 million campus on the south side of Chicago, where we'll be joined by DARPA and others on a very large, partly publicly funded activity. And quantum computing is in the same category as some of these advanced technologies like nuclear power, rockets, and so on, where there have been periods of time where that would be very naturally a government-funded activity. And then there are also very strong examples of privately funded activities, SpaceX being a good example. Yeah, we're very happy to be a private company and to be in control of our own destiny, but we're also very grateful for some of these publicly funded incentives for us to build at certain locations. Yeah.
Thank you. Patrick and Aaron, would love to hear your thoughts on, given you both have served in government, where government should be involved and what kinds of export controls govern quantum technology today, and which ones you see coming, and where you see government benefiting or playing the most important role.
Yeah, I'll jump into this and say that I see tremendous parallels between the government use, applications, need, and essential funding, as well as that in the commercial market. This is one of those areas where national security and our America's economic prosperity go hand in hand. So incredible ties there. I guess I can start by my days at the Pentagon, the quantum concerns there and how they translate over to the commercial side. The Pentagon is obviously very concerned about security, keeping secrets, as well as the ability to communicate, freely without disruption. The CIA and NSA, as well as the Pentagon, have all publicly declared that quantum computing poses a tremendous and devastating threat to the ability to maintain security out there, because it can easily break the encryption that we rely on. But the same holds true for all of our commercial security needs, from protecting patient health data to banking transactions, our intellectual property and trade secrets, customer lists, sensitive information, et cetera, et cetera. The list go on. All of them are at risk out there. In this context, rather than relying on the CIA, I turn to things like Forbes and the World Economic Forum, who have been actively looking at this space. They all conclude the same thing, that all of that private financial data can be breached with the power of quantum computing out there. They call it the quantum apocalypse, and it can be truly devastating to our economic strength as well as global stability out there. If this information is stolen, it can be leveraged for commercial advantage, ransomware, et cetera, and we're seeing that happen. There are bad actors that we've seen doing this out there. It's not just a future problem. I will say that. I agree with Pete, by the way, that it's not a moment in time where quantum computing becomes available. It's a spectrum where it becomes scaled. Right now it has limited availability, and people have to prioritize what they're using it for. But as a greater availability opens up, there'll be it'll become more ubiquitous out there. But there are entities out there. Congress released a report that said that people heard about that Chinese spy balloon that was floating over the United States that the U.S. shot down a couple of years ago. Congress concluded in its investigation that spy balloon was collecting lots of gigabytes. I won't say septillions of gigabytes because I'm not sure we're up to that level yet, but a lot of information under this concept of harvest now and decrypt later. So collecting all sorts of encrypted data, knowing that eventually they'll be able to break it. Now, some of that data might eventually be stale when they can decipher it, but some of it won't be. Same thing with Russia and other world actors that have been tapping into undersea fiber optic cables that transmit most of the world's internet, email, etc. Being able to tap into that, collect that data, and being able to decrypt it later. So these are threats to both our country and our companies right now. So as a result, as you mentioned when we opened this, Laurie, the White House has declared that quantum resilient security is a national priority. Recently, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they've been working on this for years, but they just recently released 3 different levels of protections that are quantum resilient that are out there. More are in the pipeline, which is good news. So I'll try to end that with kind of a hint of optimism out there, and that's that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and there are more tools that are coming. But of course, they're only going to be useful if we use them. So that's kind of the ties between the government and commercial applications, I think, are incredibly strong.
Thank you. Aaron, you're you obviously talk to a lot of large enterprises and have been a leader in technology risk management. What do you recommend for the directors to think about in their strategic decision making around quantum? How much should they focus on the risks that Patrick just talked about? What should they be doing to get their feet wet? And also in the chat, folks have asked, what are some good resources to start learning more about quantum and getting educated?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Patrick mentioned NIST, and NIST has actually put out some guidance. It's in draft form right now about when they will be deprecating and getting rid of some of the cryptography that's out there. And our first milestone comes in 2030. So there is some timelines now to really start pushing the organization. So as you're thinking about your cryptography, your baseline of what's going on in the organization, I think the time is now. This is not going to be an easy migration. A cryptographer friend of mine has called it the largest cryptographic migration in the history of humankind. If you think where cryptographic processes happen in your daily life, every time there's a handshake with your phone, every time you make a network connection, that cryptography is present and playing a role. And it's going to have to be rolled out. So this really isn't a cryptography problem. It becomes a data governance problem of what do we protect? Where is it sitting at? What is that data doing in transit, at rest? Where is it going when it leaves our organization? And this migration is going to touch everything in the organization, your technical debt, that Windows 98 computer that's running somewhere down the hall, your contracting. How do you handle 3rd, 4th, 5th party vendors who haven't migrated yet? How do they get on? How do you communicate? If you're working with the government, how do you communicate with the government and maintain your DFARS compliance if you're not on the same standards they are? So this is a long journey. This migration's not going to be done in a year. It's not going to be done in 2 or 3. I think it's going to be a 3 to 5 year migration for most organizations. As where training is, I saw another one in there about the state of China. For everybody, China actually released a 504 qubit computer a couple weeks ago. There's some good information out about there. So that's actually happened as well. And they've invested about 35 billion into their own research. China's done some interesting things with quantum and quantum satellites, and they've also set up some of the longest runs of quantum internet. So they're really pushing to become kind of a forefront in quantum. Training wise, there's lots of training out there. LinkedIn's got good training. A lot of it's reading papers. I think Peter will probably agree. You learn something new every day, and somebody does something new every day. And you really just got to keep on the papers and really what's going on in the news.
Any other recommendations on ways to get up to speed from Patrick or Pete?
I would just say there's heaps of really high quality YouTube videos, there's also heaps of really bad quality journalism that starts with breakthrough. Anytime you see breakthrough, in the title, you should be highly suspicious. There's been decades and decades and decades of breakthroughs and still no quantum computer. Unfortunately, the nature of this technology is that there's just a lot of hard grind. Like you just have to put your head down and work for a long time. And that's how Google have arrived at this result. There's no breakthrough actually in that Google result. It's a decade of hard work and hundreds of millions of dollars of capital. And that's how they've got there. And it's bumped their stock price by, I don't know, 4% last time I checked. 4% of $800 billion is quite a lot. So maybe it was worth it for them. But yeah, breakthrough is a little suspicious, but there are some really fantastic YouTube videos out there that'll start from the beginning and talk people through it. I would recommend that.
What type of videos did you say?
Oh, just YouTube
YouTube.
videos.
Okay. Okay. If there are any in particular you recommend, we'll try to add some. But yes, it does take a while to understand if you have not spent a lot of recent time in physics and quantum physics.
Look,
So
The only thing I'd say on that one, Laurie, just
Yeah.
to, sorry to interject, is
no, please.
in fact, I'll do an experiment. I assume most people on this call work with tech, if not in tech. Raise your hand if you could explain how a transistor works.
I don't know.
So
How many electrical engineers do we have up here?
You know, we use
Yeah.
computers every day. We're endlessly engaged with technology, but the actual physics of a transistor, where you've got a billion in your pocket, is really hardcore physics. And so, you know, with quantum computing, yes, there is really hardcore, scary physics involved, but that shouldn't necessarily be an obstacle for engaging with the technology.
Look,
And I think that's,
I was going
sorry.
to share one other resource for the group out there. NIST got together with the National Security Agency as well as the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, and they produced a how-to guide for organizations to prepare for post-quantum security. I'll share it with the group after this, but for the long and the short of it is it kind of reinforces what Aaron said, that this is a long-term data migration project. And the number one recommendation is for companies and organizations to prioritize the information that needs to be protected first and get that as the first tranche that falls underneath the post-quantum cryptography protections.
And I think, you know, with many technologies, and I'm going to switch to talk about AI versus quantum in a moment, but we quickly get to the risks, and we as board directors can be looked at as the, you know, the big risk oversight complex. So the question is, though, a lot of companies that we talk about that have those market cap increases are because they do some fundamental R&D and innovation. And so what are the things that we should be doing or asking to ensure that those new innovations are coming to life in the companies on which we serve on boards? There's certainly the questions about risk, and I would agree. I think NIST and other government agencies come out with some really good questions that we can use as part of our audit committees or cybersecurity committees. But how do we take advantage? How do we start thinking about taking advantage of the potential opportunities that this technology perhaps will afford us?
I think for me, and this is some of the work we've done with clients, is start now. Building quantum algorithms is hard. It is a difficult process, and you can start small now. And everything, as you're going through your optimization or you're trying to solve things, you can start at a smaller scale and really kind of get the feel for what makes a good quantum algorithm, what makes a good optimization process, what's going to be a place where this would be something that helps your organization. And that's scalable with the computers as they get bigger. But there is going to be a talent shortage in the quantum field. The Chicago Quantum Exchange, I was up there a few weeks ago, and they estimate next year 50% of all quantum jobs are going to be open because the people out there to do them just don't exist. So we're facing a tech shortage. We're facing a very challenging field, as Pete said, where it's really hard to build one. It takes a long time. And that's one of the things as they build the campus in Chicago is how do we staff it? How do we find the personnel to build the computers? How do we find the people to run the computers, program the computers, calibrate the computers, and then the research that's going to go on to solve problems? So I would recommend organizations really begin to develop a quantum strategy. This is going to be an emerging technology that's going to have both good and bad implications for your organization, and you need to be ready to leverage both sides of them.
Yeah, I completely agree with Aaron on that. You've got to have a strategy that leverages the capabilities and the potential use cases while also factoring in and mitigating those risks out there. It's all about staying ahead of the competition. For all of our companies out there, your competition is thinking about this. Our competition is thinking about this. You may even have board members from competitor companies on this call with us here today. They're figuring out how they can leverage quantum and then how they can protect against those quantum risks. I think as board members, what we tend to find is that our C-suite is very much focused on the here and now. Operations in the current year, maybe the next year or two out. As boards, I think we need to think a little bit more strategically, thinking that long-term, 5 to 10 years out, and asking our C-suites questions about that long-term strategy and make sure that they are adequately preparing for that in the long term.
And so how do they take the first step? You said have a strategy. What's the best way that you've seen to take that first step? How do they work with a company such as yours, Pete, or any of your organizations to figure out that first use case and take that first step? What should they do?
Yeah, so I think a little bit like AI, there's a sort of natural tendency to want to talk about democratizing the technology and to want to train half of your organization to be able to operate the quantum computer and so on. And I would definitely caution against that. I think a good analogy is like a semiconductor fab. Semiconductor fabs have changed our entire world. They've changed every industry on the planet. But the number of people who actually interface with the fab is minuscule. So it is extremely important, but it's not democratized. It's not widely directly used. And I think quantum computing will have the same dynamics. We think it's going to be hugely impactful, but we don't think that there's going to be tens of thousands of quantum software developers in every organization busily programming the quantum computer. And then we work with a long list of large companies today, customers and partners of PsiQuantum. And where we've seen the most success with those guys is where they're looking at very hard computational problems that would be very valuable to them and which they currently cannot solve. It's not very productive to look at problems that you already solve and try to make them better. It's really most productive to look for problems that you can't solve, you don't even try to solve, that you know are extremely difficult. And so good examples would be actually accurately calculating the structure of a drug molecule before you even synthesize it. That's a good example where a quantum computer could be valuable. And so, yeah, we engage with a long list of customers and partners on that kind of work. And the ambition is that we give them the strategic knowledge of where quantum computing is going to be impactful and where it might not be impactful. Yeah, I think that's valuable work to be doing today.
And today, of course, AI is the flavor of the day, and everyone is very excited about the workloads that will be handled by AI. A lot of boards are just getting educated on AI and learning to ask the right questions and figure out how to evaluate the projects that might be going on. How should they think about quantum vis-a-vis AI workloads and even traditional high performance computing work that's done today?
I think they need to start to realize, I mean, you're going to hear the word hybrid a lot, but a lot of the algorithms, even Shor's algorithm, the one that we use to crack RSA that was theorized in '94, is a hybrid algorithm. It requires pre-processing before it goes onto the quantum computer. And I've seen some of the data centers of the future where the proposal is your large language model, your high power compute, and your quantum computer sit on the same floor as a service. I think we're already seeing AI integrate into quantum with Qiskit-enabled programming and AI support on the language, pre-processing of data, post-processing of data from the quantum machines. So it's not going to be just a revolutionary technology, but it is going to integrate with our systems in very niche places where it's applicable, and it's got the support it needs.
I think what we've seen for the last couple of years with this AI migration and this AI adoption is a very good model for the most part for the transition through to that we're going to see in the future with quantum. Obviously, as Pete said, that there are some business sectors, like if you're in drug manufacturing or drug development, you are going to absolutely need quantum computing. And if you're on the board of a drug development company, you need to make sure that you've got this as part of your integral part of your strategy out there. It may be very different if you're in a manufacturing place, but like AI, many of you here in NorCal are involved in AI tech companies that are really leveraging large compute, and you see things that we didn't expect, such as huge energy draws and the need for power consumption beyond what we ever anticipated before. I think that's going to be the sort of second and third order effect that we're going to have to be thinking about for this quantum adoption.
Yeah, I think the only thing I might add to that is that today we know this list of sort of application areas, drug discovery, material science, etc. Of course, if you went to the early days of conventional computing and you asked the people who were building the first supercomputers, they would give a similar list. What's interesting is that they were wrong in a lot of ways. You know, that list of designing nuclear weapons, code breaking, designing nuclear weapons, code breaking, ballistics calculations, like the reasons that people built the first conventional computers turned out to be very short-sighted. And I think, you know, we're excited actually for the same thing to happen with quantum computing, where that list of applications grows over time and there are surprises along the road.
We have a competitive group on here. I'm reading in the chat. A lot of folks want to know where the US is versus other countries. And Pete, I'm sure you're having to navigate export considerations and which countries you can work with, both at a commercial and government level. So where are we in the geopolitical competitive landscape, and what do we need to think about there?
I can comment. So, I mean, the US, the UK, a few European nations, Israel, Singapore, and Australia, maybe Japan come to mind as nations that have invested early in quantum computing. The US is definitely very far up the list. I think this Google result is a great kind of example of the US's strength in quantum computing. Nobody else has been able to do that. It's a very discrete milestone. There are estimates from the big consulting companies that China spends 10 times more than the United States on quantum computing. Obviously, people are incentivized. People like me who want money are incentivized to say things like that. So you should take that with a grain of salt. But I think it is probably approximately true. Yeah, this is a technology that, much like semiconductor manufacturing, is increasingly seen as a sovereign strategic capability. So these are big, expensive, very technically dense machines, and the world should care about where they are constructed. And we're seeing nations behave accordingly.
Yeah, I'll pile on and say I agree with that. I think most people agree that the United States and China are the two global leaders on this space. Where exactly they stand relative to each other are state secrets that the public, we are never going to know. But nevertheless, there is stiff competition to get to or stay at the top of that list.
And on the security side, there's a lot of concern about the encryption standards of today being broken. How should a board be thinking about making that migration? When should they be jumping in saying, what's our post-quantum cryptography strategy? Are there firms out there that can help them do that migration at this point, or how should they be thinking about looking at cybersecurity and being prepared for that migration?
I think for what we've built, I mean, there are firms that can help. We've even built stuff. It's early in the days, as Patrick mentioned. The first, standards have just come out. We've got 3 solid standards. The 4th will be in draft shortly, and there's 14 new competitive algorithms coming. One of the things to remember is we're heading towards something called cryptographic agility. The days of being able to hard code your cryptography into your applications and expect that it'll be good for 15, 20 years are going to have to kind of stop. We continually say quantum resistant with these algorithms because we don't know. Peter did a good job of pointing out that we may find things with quantum down the road that we didn't know was going to be applicable or that it would be able to do, and those algorithms may have to be changed rapidly. So right now, I think, figuring out your cryptographic baseline, what kind of cryptography is going on within your organization, and what are the long timeline things you're going to have to replace, what applications will have to be rebuilt, what's going to have to be reprogrammed. Your Windows, your Linux, that'll be built in as soon as they're done testing, and that'll be an option. We're figuring in some of the testing we've done about 90% of what's in an organization will be patched and remediated by the vendor, but it's that 10% or that tech debt that's sitting in the basement, those old mainframes, those old compute systems, or old applications that aren't going to migrate easily. How do you handle those? How do you get that into your replacement cycle and really ensure that the organization is protected with those long timeline items?
I think the only thing I'd add on the code breaking stuff is obviously it's scary. It's a scary idea that we're going to build machines that can break most encryption. The good news is that machines that are commercially lucrative are expected to arrive well before machines that are cryptographically relevant. So we expect to be able to do commercially valuable things significantly with significantly smaller quantum computers than what is required to read emails and break codes and so on. And so hopefully, that's reassuring in that I should get rich well before I can read your emails is the simple way to to put it. So if you see me currently, I just got rid of half of a 1997 Toyota Camry with bees in the trunk. But if you do see me driving in a Ferrari, then you know that maybe it's time to worry about code breaking. But yeah, there's an economic early warning sign, I think, as these machines scale up, and that's actually healthy for the field.
Did you say bees in the trunk?
Yeah, there were bees living in the trunk. Yeah.
The world is going to be tracking Pete's driving habits as a measure of quantum evolution. So what I'll say to that is, as these quantum resilient capabilities evolve, the problem is they can't just be dropped in without any impact on the systems out there. So the good news is that they exist and can be quantum resilient. The bad news is they often take up far more space than our current security requirements and then slow things down. It's kind of like getting a new capability on an airplane, but it's really big and heavy, and it makes takeoffs and landings and flight more difficult. So it's just something thinking, all going back to the initial question of what organizations have to do. They have to have a data migration strategy that includes this security as part of it.
Okay, we also have a crowd that's interested in energy. We have questions on fission and fusion, using nuclear for taking care of the power needs, as well as solving the magnetic field issue for fusion. So curious what you think about energy. Is this going to be as energy hungry as today's AI data centers? Is it going to be more energy hungry? How do we think about that?
I'm going to defer to the PhDs, but my earlier assessment was that it's going to be as energy hungry or more so than the AI revolution.
Yeah, I would go I'd go a little bit gentler than that, Patrick, myself. Obviously, this is up for debate. we've got lots of hard problems trying to build a quantum computer. I thank God every day that I don't have to deal with the two problems that AI people have. The first is that they're going to kill all humans, and they have to debate the probability with which they're going to kill all human beings. I don't have to worry about that. And secondly, that they have to turn on 3 Mile Island and new nuclear power stations. And we don't think that we're in that regime. So our systems in Australia and Chicago, those are the biggest quantum computing projects on the planet, as far as I know. And we spec those sites for about 100 megawatts. So that's in the same kind of ballpark as a conventional supercomputer or a modest sized data center, but it's not as big as the multi-gigawatt proposals that have been made by Facebook and by others more recently. So it's not cheap and cheerful. You're not building it in your backyard, but we also don't think that it has to be in the stratospheric territory that has become, relevant recently.
And based on all three of you working with government institutions, what can you share about either limits they're placing on their own activities or the applications that they are using, aside from obviously security? But what are we learning about how governments are addressing this problem? And it's interesting that Australia took such a big leap, which is terrific, but also I know the US, as you said, is far ahead. So what are you learning from working with government leaders? How are they thinking about allocating capital to quantum versus other things that they're concerned with at the moment?
Yeah, well, there's actually, oh, go ahead.
No, please, Aaron.
I was going to say, there are RFPs from numerous government agencies already out there. I know the Air Force has set aside, I think it's 500 million for quantum projects where they're accepting white papers for research areas where they believe they may be able to get gains or build something. So there's a lot of money being spent, a lot of money looking at quantum sensing, a lot of interest in the field as quantum computers come up. Obviously, the DoD very interested in where this is going to go, but we are seeing the money start to come out and the investment into research and those smaller startups that may have those novel ideas.
Yeah, I think it's interesting actually, like this whole idea of sovereign, strategic, technical infrastructure type capability is quite new actually, right? Like it took a long time before people realized that semiconductor fabs are geopolitically important. It's only in the last few years that anyone even knows what TSMC or ASML are. And but that is accelerating, and certainly governments are viewing quantum computing through the same lens, that it's a geopolitically significant, strategic, sovereign capability. You want it built on your land. And then, the other thing that I'll just mention is this is a space with a lot of hype, a lot of fluff and noise and confusing messaging. One of the best things that we've seen is the DARPA utility scale quantum computing program. So that's 50 scientists and engineers from DARPA who are basically scrutinizing various different of the larger efforts. So they're looking at Microsoft and they're also looking at us. And that's a multi-year program where they're actually adopting a skeptical starting position. So they're saying, we think this quantum computing stuff is nonsense, useless, never going to happen. That's our baseline assumption. And then they've been digging in to what we've actually shown, what Microsoft is actually showing, and now some other companies. And having that kind of red team, like skeptical, but technically very deep activity, which also comes with funding. I think that's a really excellent way for a government to handle something that otherwise can get out of control or be very confusing to politicians. Yeah.
I'll add on just from the cybersecurity side of this. For those that are involved in the post-quantum cryptography piece, it should come as no surprise that this ends up being a heavily regulated area. Maybe not quite as much as banking or financial institutions for those of you who are on bank boards, but there are some pretty strict export controls that someone's question alluded to earlier for reasons that are pretty obvious. This is controlled by the Department of Commerce and the Bureau of Industry and Standards, the BIS. They monitor this pretty carefully. So while there is a lot of money available to those cybersecurity startups that want to get into this space, there are also a lot of regulations that they're going to have to be able to navigate to do it properly.
So for each of you, what is the area that you think we should be thinking about for both? We've got some middle market companies as well as some large companies. What are the things that you would want to either convey or inform the directors on this call that they should either be getting educated on or asking their companies about? I understand that it varies to some extent by industry, because obviously in drug discovery, chemistry, material science, certainly they should be learning and thinking and trying some projects together with some of the incredible companies that are out there. But even as you talked about, portfolio optimization in financial services is a good one to look at. New materials for automotive or for any kind of manufacturing seems to be an area that's interesting. But I wanted to give you each a chance to convey something that we haven't covered that you would love for this audience to know about before we go.
I'll jump in first. I would recommend posing two questions to your C-suites, one on the offense side, one on the defense side. So again, for the offense, what is our company's long-term strategy to leverage quantum computing to improve whatever it is that we do? Again, as you said, Laurie, that varies by industry, but I think that's a great starting point. That's the offense. The defense side is, and what's our plan to transition to post-quantum security and encryption tools that are out there? So those two questions, I wouldn't pose it to them like directly face-to-face, answer me now. We all know the deal. Get this on the board agenda for the next quarterly board meeting, or particularly if it's a strategy session. You push this onto the agenda, force them to go do their homework and come back to you with good, solid answers to those questions.
And I'm just going to chime in. Actually, the general counsel of one of my boards came to me, and this is a CPG company, and he said, Laurie, you need to tell us, what should we be thinking about with quantum and what are the best applications for our company? So I was really impressed that they are not your typical industry, but are already thinking about it. Sorry, go ahead, Pete and Aaron.
I think for me, it would be start getting that awareness and the strategy in place. The technology is coming. I always joke it's been perpetually 5 years away for 30 years. But we're getting there, and we are solving the technical challenges. We were at the Cloud Symposium for Microsoft in New York and met with FDIC and OCC, and they're going to begin asking, what is your quantum strategy in the financial services starting in January? It is coming. It's something that's going to be long term. You're not going to fix it quickly. It's going to take a lot of work, a lot of research, a lot of understanding of your systems, and really the time to kind of get the house in order and get data governance in place and understand what you're going to apply where. I thought Patrick's talking about the size of these algorithms. Some of them are 30 times bigger than what we used to deal with when you run them at full speed and full power. So it is going to be a significant change in how we do things, but there's also advantage there. So make sure your organization is looking at both sides and that you're ready to be a part of this as it comes to fruition.
I think it's very hard to know how to win, like I would view this as, I mean, that's almost a tautology. It's hard to win. I would view this like the early days of conventional computing. It's a disruption. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's something good. It is a disruption which you need to then strategize around. So Berkshire Hathaway's website is a terrible website. It's one of the worst websites ever. They obviously decided that they weren't going to invest in Web 2.0 and Web 3.0, and they have won despite that. So they looked at a disruption and they made some choices and they went off and won. And there will be companies that will completely ignore quantum computing will strategically, intentionally decide to ignore it and will go off and succeed tremendously. There will also be companies who adopt it to high heaven and fail. And there will also be companies who adopt it smarter, better, faster, with more luck than anyone else. And those companies we think are going to be extremely well off as a result of that. So it's it's a change in the landscape, and then actually capitalizing on that, I think, comes down to execution, and is a very subtle art in reality.
All right. Well, I'm so glad we had this topic, because I certainly have not been invited to quantum computing for boards from any other organization. So I wanted to thank NACD Northern California, as well as all of you who are starting to get educated, and again, KPMG for sponsoring this event. And I think this was tremendous, and I'm looking forward to hearing about all of the projects that all of you start working on to start innovating. And I wanted to thank all of our panelists for providing their wisdom.